This is the Ramana Maharshi 40 Verses on Reality Satsang, a time for self-reflection and self-inquiry. Know yourself and be always free and at peace. I'm Richard Clarke, hosting this satsang. Welcome. I'm a seeker like you, sharing what we love. I've been blessed with years of deep teaching and practice. I bring this to this satsang. This week's reading from 40 Verses on Reality is verse 22. These are Ramana's words. The divine light gives light to the mind and shines within it. Except by turning the mind inward and fixing it in the divine, there is no other way to know him through the mind. How do you know the mind? The mind gets its light from the self. It doesn't stand in its own light, its own consciousness, its own awareness. The mind is really an illusion, the illusion of a separate entity called I. Can you really know something that is illusory? The illusion lasts until its seeming reality is challenged. Self-inquiry, again and again, challenges this illusion. When you no longer project this illusion, reality stands alone, with no further effort. The only effort that is needed is the effort to sustain the illusion. To know the mind, you must know its source, which is consciousness, the self. The mind cannot know the mind, so your meditation and inquiry must take you deeper than the mind. What lights up the mind? Where does this consciousness come from? Does the mind provide its own knowing, or is the mind itself known? Who or what is the knower of the mind? The mind cannot know the self. You can know the self, though. Just dismiss all that comes and goes, and hold to that which is always. What is always is the self, the being, consciousness, bliss that you are. You know the self experientially, not cognitively. You know the self in this present moment. Your memory of the experience is just mental, not the experience. Your anticipation of the future experience of the self is just mental, not the experience. You know the self always. It's just that sometimes you don't notice this knowing. But this knowing is always present. It even knows the blankness of sleep and your quiet, still mind in the deepest meditation. Om. Now to our videos for the week. First is Swami Sarvapriyananda. and his is consciousness, the self.
Swamiji, very simple question. What is the link between consciousness and prana? Second question, is consciousness is Chaitana or consciousness is Atma?
Yes. So two questions. Link between consciousness and life. And is consciousness, if you translate what you said in Sanskrit, if you translate, is consciousness consciousness or is consciousness the self? The straight first short answer. What is the link between consciousness and life? Consciousness is the foundation of life, according to Advaita Vedanta. And what is consciousness consciousness or is consciousness self? Answer is yes to both. Consciousness is of course consciousness, and that consciousness is the self. Question is, what is Atma? Self. The materialist will say body is the self. Some people say the mind is the self. Most educated, sensitive, thinking people amongst us, we say, I am the person in the body. But Advaita Vedanta says consciousness is the self. But again, to understand it very clearly, it is not consciousness which we immediately think about awareness. Oh, I am aware. So this must be, is this the ultimate reality of the universe? No, no, no. That's awareness already limited by the mind. That's looking at your face in a mirror. The mirror is the mind, and the face you see in the mirror is the consciousness already involved in the mind. But the original face, which is being reflected, that's original consciousness. Because if we get a sense of that, we'll see how tremendously distinct it is from everything else. It is not an object. The awareness which we feel right now, which you call Chaitana, that awareness which we feel right now, that's also an object. Because you feel it. But what feels that awareness? There you will see Advaitin is right when he calls it Brahman, Purnam, the whole, the infinite. But the Buddhist is also right when he calls it the empty. That reality is empty of all objects. But all the objects are full of it, of that reality. Because they cannot exist without it. The entirety of this universe, it cannot exist without you, that existence, consciousness, place.
And now we will listen to Mooji talk about freedom from the mind.
Very important to be aware of your mind. One thing, no? Aware of your mind, what your mind is. Yesterday I was hinting a bit at the beginning of Satsang that most people, if you let them sit down, even for, like for 5 minutes without anything happening, their minds start to make up things because you're not used to it. You're not used to being by yourself and not thinking. If you're by yourself and not thinking, it's because you've gone to sleep or something. So the mind automatically starts to come up and activities start very much. So I say, observe your mind and see what your mind produces. And then as you keep watching, but don't identify, just watch, the suggestions that come through the mind and the, sort of restlessness, all this, just be aware of them, be aware, be aware, be aware. And gradually, by knowing that you're not that and you're watching that, your attention comes back to awareness. You become naturally self-aware. Because a lot of times we identify with the mind without intending to. Because you're looking and you're kind of into something and it's like you're obeying the mind's suggestions. No? So if you start to watch the mind, automatically it creates a separation between mind and self. This is very good, very important thing what I'm sharing. If you are observing the mind rather than just serving and acting out mind, thoughts and suggestions and so on, just be aware, sit, even for 5 minutes, you just watch every thought, every suggestion that comes in the mind without identifying with it, then automatically a gap opens up where you can see that the mind becomes an object of your attention and leaves you as the subject of witnessing. And so automatically it throws you back into self-awareness. And you know the difference between, let's say you must know the difference between yourself and your mind. That is the exercise I'm saying. So again, you just stop and just pay attention to, just be quiet and then watch the movement from the mind, which you will know. Thoughts, feelings, memory, sort of like projections, imagination, images, all these are coming from mind. Means that they don't actually belong to the present moment. They don't belong to anything around you. Everything around us is totally innocent. Nothing is attacking you. Everything is just as it is. But in the mind starts to create these kind of relationships and intention and what to do list and so on like that. So when you're conscious of that activity by just witnessing it but not identifying with it like this, then somehow immediately this thing like this, just like this, it just opens up and you can see that that's mind activity, and you become naturally self-aware that you are not that activity, you are the witness of it. So again, when I say we must discover the difference between yourself and the mind, that's what happens. You start. The more we do that, the more somehow we can be self-aware, which is not just mind-aware. You're aware of the mind. You can work with mind. When you're self-aware, you come into shapelessness. You're shapeless awareness. No? And inside that, there's a shape of the mind and activities. When you're shapeless, you can deal with shapes. Okay, you can work with them because the background is the shapeless. That's simple exercise. I was trying to get that across yesterday. Just observe your mind. Again, for most people, if they sit down for 3-5 minutes and they're not told what to do, okay? If they're told what to do, if you say, we're going to sit for 5 minutes, the mind says, okay, we're going to sit for 5 minutes. And then, okay, you can just about handle it. But if you let people sit and they don't know, you don't tell them what to do, then they start to play with their mind, where they play, like this, In fact, you're in a state of waiting. You're waiting for something to happen. And we're almost always in some gear. I say, let's put a mental gear. You're up to something. You're on some program. And so we never quite learn to rest or to acknowledge the natural resting place and the peace of the self. Like we're unaware of our natural peace. Your being should not be governed by your mind. And in the state of the functioning consciousness, you should be in the background awareness. So you can watch everything. You don't reject it cynically. You're aware of it. When you're self-aware, then your actions become cosmic manifestation, meaning that the actions that it was made to perform. And that's why everything becomes easy, because you don't have to plan that. It's just the life is already supporting the activity, which is a cosmic manifest functioning. The other functioning I call mind activity, which a lot of time we're living in mind activity, mind generated activity, means that the activity which has no real fruit. It's like a fruit tree that bears no fruit, except the fruit of just disharmony and suffering. So that thing, the mind generated activity, which is where the ego lives, that activity we're in the world is very highly engaged with. Procrastinating, fantasizing, wishful thinking, memory, subjective, interpretations and stuff like this. And that makes the house busy. So when it comes time for conscious resting, it's like we don't know what to do. There's so much resistance is in the system. It feels like, you say just to close your eyes and people start to feel restless. I said, don't try and stop the restlessness. Let the restlessness come and begin to observe it with detachment. Don't try and shut it down or find some kind of distraction for it. Let the restlessness come. Feel it in the body. That's the beginning of your healing and the beginning of your self-awareness. Feel the restlessness and say, okay, let that happen. Don't try and stop it. Just be in the place of just the awareness. So, yeah, but I can't do it. I said, but even the voice that says I can't do it is also something observable. It's not the awareness. And little bit by little bit you persevere and you start to see a gap opens and you can feel the difference between that is mind and the weakness is still. and you begin to discover the weakness. And you be where the weakness is, and you can see the mind. Then you can more discern the functioning that are right to happen. Like when you move in your life, naturally you're moving, the people you meet without planning, that's part of your cosmic activity. You understand that? Whatever you do, you go down the road, things you can never plan by the mind. These are called that which is ordained by God. That activity you will see when you pay attention to it, because everyone is living that, but not consciously. And what we do when those activities come, because they're not arranged, we tend to feel, yeah, no, I'm not in the time. I ain't got time for this, man. Because you prioritize your mental activities rather than your cosmic functioning. It makes sense, no? Doesn't it, like that? And so we begin to recognize more and more and cooperate with the cosmic functioning. And you find that your day happens in such a way that you could not have planned it any better than that. You find that somehow you say, wow, it's so fulfilling, you know. I met so-and-so today. Yeah, but did you have arrangement? No, we just bumped into each other and we were talking and so much came up like that. Whereas the activity is like, no, I planned to do this, it never worked out, and I feel so frustrated, and oh, it's not working, I don't see it. And of course it's not working. Because you want life to obey your personal projections. But life is flowing by itself. When I say that even disharmony is part of the total harmony, it means that even your mind projected activity is swallowed up in the cosmic activity, makes use of it, but you will not benefit from it. You will suffer it because you're not conscious of where it is useful. Where it fails for you personally, it succeeds by God's grace. He will use your malfunctioning to support something else that was the intention of the cosmic functioning. Because when I said many years ago, consciousness never wastes any of its activity. So what you think is waste for you, it's already used it. Turns everything into compasses, everything is working. But you are not conscious. When you're conscious of your consciousness, then you're full of praise and gratitude to God. You say, wow, you know, no human being could plan that. The greatest planner could not arrange this because this happened by itself. This is what I'm pointing out. So beautiful, and everyone is at the highest part of yourself in your core. You are that. We are that. But in our expression, because we entertain and believe ourselves to be the ego, which is a part of the total functioning, but very, very narrow. You're living in this very narrow path. But that narrow path is just a little blip in the infinite scope of consciousness. So if people could just understand that and just somehow register that internally, it's already the fruit of that is amazing. When I say this is a fruit that never becomes oversweet, and every day becomes your best day, something fresh. If it's not like that, we're living too much in the mind. Mind like that. When you realize where you are and what mind is, and you honor this, then the mind returns to what I call natural mind. It means that the mind without antagonism. The mind is antagonistic to the ego, but is in service to the beingness. That's the Lord of the mind, not the person.
All right. And finally is Nome talking about the meaning of within.
The self of the nature of being, consciousness, bliss, ever is. It is unalterable, knowing no condition, state, or any kind of change whatsoever. When the nature of the self is obscured such is called ignorance. But for whom does it become obscured? Not for the self. Ignorance is truly rootless, for it is based on a non-existent entity called by the name ego, I thought, I notion, etc. In self-knowledge, one realizes the non-existence of such an individual entity. So that with self-knowledge, there is liberation from all of the imagination that is born out of unreal differentiation. Without self-knowledge, there is no such liberation, and there is the appearance of bondage. With self-knowledge, liberation is realized as the innate, the natural state, and there's not a trace of bondage. For self-knowledge, the spiritual instruction given by the Maharshi is to inquire within. Within certainly does not signify within the body, nor within the mind, for these are things that are objective to us in our experience. Within signifies that which is utterly non-objective. What is non-objective is unformed and unborn. Everything that is needed for self-realization, or liberation as we call it, is within. Where else is the Maharshi but within? But within is not confined within a body or a mind, and certainly not within an individual. Where is he but within? Where else is grace but within? Where else is the place of spiritual instruction but within? Where else is the place of true practice, the inquiry to know the self, except within? And of course, where is realization but within? To know the meaning of within is supremely important. It amounts to knowing the nature of your own existence. Without giving rise to the notion of an I and what follows. What is this very existence that is yourself? Who am I? The self which is within is not in time. The realization of it, therefore, is not an event or an occurrence. The meaning of within, the self, is not contained within thought. Self-realization, therefore, is not a state of mind. Rather, that consciousness, which is always transcendent of every state of mind, that does not wake, dream, or sleep, that consciousness is the self, and is the place, if we can call it, of realization. Cease to misidentify with the body, with the mind, as an I. And that which is called within, which is truly infinite, one, without a second, knows itself. The knowledge is not its possession. The knowledge is it itself. Being is knowing. Inquire within.
All right, now let's close with a short meditation and inquiry. Breathe in and out with long, slow breaths. Feel the breath come in, then as it goes out. Notice that you exist. You exist and you know that you exist. And investigate within yourself. Who knows the mind? Does the mind know itself? When you inquire, for whom is the inquiry? Is inquiry for the mind or the knowing self? Who am I? All right. Now we'll close with a short chant. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Peace, peace, peace. Thank you for letting me share this teaching with you. This series on Ramana's 40 Verses on Reality will continue in the following weeks. If this satsang was of interest, I have more, a free book site, a YouTube site, and my blog. The URLs will be on the screen next. Namaste.